can make it, Daddy.
What's up, everybody? My name is Taylor Gray, and welcome to the I Got Time Today podcast, where we take a look at all things social, spiritual, and satirical. We have a full plate in front of us today, but I first want to start out by giving a couple of shout outs. First and foremost, as I said, I like to highlight brands and organizations, people doing some dope things here locally in Columbus. And I'm wearing one of my favorite brands. This sweatshirt is made by the Fruit Market. It's a gift from my wife, Liz. Shout out to you. She's one of our sponsors. And I wanted to wear this today just to highlight, man, this is a brand that I love and support, and I've got many pieces. So check out their Instagram, the Fruit Market. Do your Googles, find out where they are and all of that. But I just wanted to show them some love today. I got my Black Panther mug. This is our Black History Month episode. I want to shout out my friend Joel Markovich. You know, some of the best gifts that you can get come with good stories. And this mug has a really good story. A story we'll unpack another day, but I just wanted to shout out my homie Joel for showing love with this mug, and it's become one of my favorite ones. Wanted to share it with you guys. So, again, I got time today. There are some things we're going to unpack today, but first I want to thank supporters, people who have been listening. The last episode was really cool and on so many different levels. We'll get into that in a second, but I just want to thank you for listening and showing your support in whatever way you did. If you'd like to support financially, again, the rhythm is once a month. If you want to kick it up a notch, then I will need some help. So I often will offer an opportunity for you to support financially, either via Cash App or PayPal. Some of you guys did that last month, and if we continue to build up support in that way, maybe we can go more frequency before the year is over. But for now, we'll keep it at once a month. Seems like it's a pretty good rhythm for us to roll with right now. So listen, today I got a couple of different things I want to introduce on the podcast, a couple of different segments I'd like to introduce. The first one, probably near and dear to many of your hearts, maybe not so much mine, but the comment section. I want to introduce a segment called the comment section. Clearly, last podcast, it was going to elicit some response. And there were people who made their feelings known in the comment section. Just something you should know about me. I just want to let you know out the gate. I don't typically read the comment section. That's not always been the case. In times past, I used to interact with comments a lot. I used to argue with people all the time. I'm in a space in my life right now where I just don't need that. That's one of the things I don't have time for, and I don't think I'm gonna ever make time for that. So I want you to feel free to express yourself in the comment section and know that you're dealing with a person who is not crafting a hostile response to what you have to say. I have found that we're probably not going to solve all the world's issues in the comment section. I'm probably not even going to get you to agree with me in the comment section, but I want you to be free to use your voice. And me, as a person who can take it, I'm cool. Go ahead and get your bars off. Let everybody know how you feel. I'm not here to argue with you, so feel free to disagree with me. Those who are rocking with me, thanks for your support. Thanks for the love. Thanks for the encouragement. It gets back to me somehow. But this section is just to acknowledge those who are commenting in the comment section. In the future, I don't know, maybe there is a good comment that we need to unpack and explore a little bit more. And we'll take that opportunity when it comes. But I really just wanted to address maybe a theme of some concern from the comment section. I am not hostile to those who still want to call themselves Christians. If you still identify as that term, if that's comfortable, a comfortable way you'd like to use language to communicate your faith, that's totally fine. I'm not here to try to change your mind about how you use language. I was just trying to share my own personal journey. So feel free to keep calling yourself Christians. Feel free to call your organization Christian. Feel free to associate and align with Christian media, Christian art. That term means something to you, then feel free to keep on cooking. I'm not here to take that from you. So I just wanted to let you know, because I know that may have been a concern, or at least a challenge as far as how we interact in the future. Finally, I'll just leave you with a principle from Scripture. I really want you to work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. The way that we could say that with updated modern language is work out your own idea of faith and pursuit of Jesus with reverence and awe of who God is, which means you have to take some time to find out who he is, which means you have to take some time to explore that in the scriptures and through people who become trusted resources for you. But work it out for yourself. That's what I'm trying to do for myself. All right, so that's the comment section. What I'd like to do now is go into a lyric breakdown. From time to time, this is what I do, because one of the hats that I wear is as a rapper, a hip hop artist. And I'm often creating music through the seasons of my life. Right now, I just released a new mixtape called Thou Shalt Not Covet 2. I released Thou Shalt Not Covet, the first edition, last year, roughly a year or so from this point in 2023. And this year is the updated version. You can find that on bandcamp.com. That's taylorgray.bandcamp.com. I direct people to Bandcamp because as an independent artist, they've shown me so much love over the years, and I want to continue to refer people to that support base for independent artists. So that's where the new tape is, and the lyrics that we're going to take a quick look at come from Thou Shalt Not Covet 2. Comes from a track called If You Know, You Know. You probably just saw the letters and the acronym, and people go crazy with acronyms, but this is one of those acronyms that if you know what it means, you know what it means, because this is our vernacular. And I try to address a number of different things in that brief song. One thing I want to highlight is some particular space that I took to address a preacher, spiritual leader, in some circles, a person who has been very influential to how they are practically living out their faith and coming to an understanding of what it means to serve Jesus. His name is John Piper, very influential brother, and one of the people who I've been influenced by over my time in the faith. But I took some time in this song to address something that he said relative to one of my other influences in the faith. I want you to take a listen to the bars right now.
Yo. A church lifer, a faith plus works lifer. See, I believe in Jesus who loves and cursed vipers. It was implied MLK was in hell by John Piper. That I was wild, dog.
Okay, so yeah, this is, I guess, 2024. Maybe Cat Williams kind of set the tone for 2024. This is the year where we are just going to address everything that we need to address. We need to address it directly. We need to name names. We are going to take it there. That's the energy that sounds like this year kicked off with. So I felt like it was a good time for me to address what John Piper specifically said about Dr. Martin Luther King. Let me set the stage for you real quick. This was roughly 5 years ago. There was a conference called MLK 50, where a group of leaders came together, church leaders came together to commemorate 50 years since Dr. King passed. His legacy and the way that he has influenced society, his example and representation for the church and beyond. During that conference, a lot of people had opportunities to speak. And John Piper was the closing speaker for this conference. During this time, he had something to say relative to Dr. King's theology. I wanted to show it to you right now.
In his early 20s, Martin Luther King turned away from these great objective biblical realities, and you can read about it with sadness in many of his papers in those days. And I don't know if he came home. Many believe he did. Micah on the panel documented the point at which he thought he came home. Remember that? His house was bombed, got up at midnight, put his face in his hands, and met God in a profound way. I hope so. Here's my exhortation.
So when I heard this for the first time, I remember pretty vividly. I was sitting in a room with another pastor I was serving with at the time, and I heard him make reference to at least a question about whether or not Dr. King really was a part of the faith. And the implications seemed to put into question whether or not he was actually home with the Lord or he was somewhere else. That's what I heard when I listened to that quote at that time. And it was just like something that I put in my mind. I put a pin in it in my brain, and I was like, maybe I'll come back to revisit this later. But I never forgot him saying that. Years have passed since then, and I haven't really had time to speak on this in depth because I wanted to speak on it with some weight and maybe give some clarity around my response to it. My response was to be offended. I was actually really offended by the fact that he decided to say this at this conference at this time. It didn't seem like it made much sense to close out the conference in such a way where we were supposed to be honoring Dr. King, not necessarily questioning the validity of his faith, the authenticity of his faith. And if you listen to the entire sermon, there was an emphasis on the supremacy of Christ. And I just didn't understand why this point needed to be made in contrast with the overall point. To be honest with you, I don't understand why a sermon about the supremacy of Christ was needed to close out the MLK 50 experience. Not saying it never needed to be said, not saying it never does need to be preached, but I guess I remember the old Jamie Foxx video where there was a comedian who was supposed to be roasting Emmitt Smith, and instead he was just telling jokes about the people who were on the panel up there also to roast Emmitt Smith. And I'll never forget, Jamie Foxx spoke up, and it turned into a roast of said comedian and said, hey, listen, we're all here to make remarks about Emmitt Smith. Do you have any comments for him? And he proceeded into the classic improv, I'm your conscience. Well, where was Dr. Piper's conscience in this moment? Because I don't understand why he would take specific time to question whether or not Dr. King trusted Christ for his salvation in this moment. This gave me an opportunity to think about this further, because it's not the first time I've seen this, where a preacher or pastor or some sort of spiritually influential person decides to read writings from somebody back in history to determine the validity of their faith. So the emphasis, if I use technical terms, is on orthodox or orthodoxy, what you are stating as a result of your belief, how you have come to conclusion that the Christian so-called faith is what you believe and the way that you're going to follow. Well, Dr. Piper took some time to question Dr. King's conclusions based on a seminary paper that he wrote. I believe it was in his 20s. So that was documentation that he decided to extract an opinion from, or at least imply some sort of question about the conclusions of Dr. King's faith. Here's my problem with this. My problem is more macro than it is micro, but I feel like this was a good opportunity to address it. The macro issue with orthodoxy for me is that it places a hyper emphasis on what is said instead of what is practiced, what you actually do with what you say you believe. The technical term for that being orthopraxy. My issue with Dr. Piper and many others like him is that there is such a heavy emphasis on what somebody wrote down or how impressively they articulated their faith in the gospel, that there is no true investigation or interrogation of what they actually did. at least not on the equal level of emphasis as what they said. It's almost as if we're willing to give people the benefit of the doubt if we were impressed with how they articulated their faith versus what they actually did with it. Now, Dr. King is a person who we should all be learning from in the vein of orthopraxy, what he did as a result of the faith that he proclaimed, the faith that he had in Christ being demonstrated in action, the things that he committed his hands to, and we could even take it as far as to the type of death that he suffered. Dr. Piper did not suffer the same types of circumstances. He did not even really understand the cultural conditions of the day for Black people. What does it mean to be a so-called Christian in the civil rights era? What does it mean to practice a faith that is supposed to liberate people instead of oppress and enslave them? And I felt like John Piper made a really unfair comment at a really bad time. He acknowledged that other people do believe that his salvation was authentic, but I got a big problem with us sitting back with our human minds and human perspectives making eternal decisions about the state of somebody else's soul, especially when we don't have all the information we need to make such determination. Determinations like that truly do belong to God. But I will say, if we're going to evaluate fruit, if we're going to evaluate the outcomes of what people profess to believe, then we should probably be looking at what they did in their life versus what they said. This is a macro issue for me, where we become too impressed with the polish of how well something is spoken or how well spoken a person is versus taking any careful investigation as to what kind of life they live as a result of their impressive proclamation. And this is the thing. I can disagree with famous pastors and preachers. As a matter of fact, I'm most comfortable disagreeing with famous pastors and preachers because for me, at least, it reveals a level of humanity in that person. We should never just be trusting people blindly with what they say and not taking any kind of careful investigation as to why what they say is true or why what they say is not true. Critique is healthy. Critique is part of discernment. Critique helps us actually get to the truth. So a lot of the people who I would call my biggest influences, I have critiques about them. Absolutely. But this kind of critique was particularly offensive because it implied an outcome about someone's eternal state versus an action that we can view in real time in our society. So to John Piper, I think you should apologize. I think you should publicly make reference to a mistake or a misstep that you made in implying this. And ultimately, to make it right, just acknowledge that you don't have all the information, or it's hard for you to contextualize the faith for a Black person in that time being a leader in a way that was absolutely necessary, not just for Black people, but for our entire society. I can come back to that at a different time, but I just had to make reference to it because we just, I believe, in totality, let it slide. So we can come back to this at another date, but I wrote those lyrics for a reason, and I hope they resonate in a particular way to advocate for those of us who appreciate Dr. King's contributions as a means of spiritual inspiration, spiritual influence in continuing his work today. Finally, what I want to talk about to send us on our way, and this is kind of more of the broad I got time today topic that I can leave us with. Today, I want to talk about how to leave your church. How to leave your church. Now, I already know, y'all. I already know. The response is there. What you're triggered on some level. What is he talking about, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm gonna refer to my notes here just so I stay honest and, make sure I say what I need to say to keep y'all here with me and make sure y'all don't run away as fast as you can. So this whole idea of leaving your church, I felt like it was important to address it because when you attend a church or if you consider yourself a member of a church, It's like a relationship. And I think on a broad level, we can acknowledge maybe for our time in our society, maybe we're just paying attention to it more. We're really bad at relationships. We're just bad at communication. We're bad at trust. We're bad at seeking clarity and understanding from one another. And our relationship with the church is something that we can evaluate. Because when somebody leaves the church, it's like a bad breakup. It's like something that, just exists in your soul as baggage from a past experience with no closure. So when I bring this topic up, my attempt is to help folks come to some closure about their relationship with the church. And that's not just people who decide to leave churches, that's including pastors who have had to contend with people leaving their churches. I got a big disclaimer at the end of what I have to say, so stay tuned. I'm starting here, but there is a huge disclaimer I want to leave with us before we go. So first and foremost, what are we saying when we think about leaving a church? More than likely, we're talking about stopping our attendance of service, not being present for certain events, maybe not being available to work in certain capacities where we've been relied upon. There's a break off. There is a relationship shift with people and pastor that becomes different going forward. It discontinues. I think that's generally what people are talking about when they leave. They say, I'm getting ready to leave my church, or they're making a decision to leave their church. Not talking about the church universal. Maybe they're still working out their faith and it looks different for them now to have church. But when people say I'm leaving a church, it elicits a certain response, because whatever people expect to see you there, they're not going to see you no more. So how do we wrestle with that? I want to start with pastors. I want to come out the gate and acknowledge to you that we pastors have egos, and we wrestle with our egos all the time. Relative to how people respond to us, whether or not people trust us, or whether or not people talk about us in negative light or a positive light that doesn't really capture how we really want to hear it. The bottom line is we wrestle with fragile egos from time to time. And that's because a lot of what we have to do, we don't have a lot of control over. We can't physically make people show up to be bought into an idea that's not always tangible to them all the time. People have to choose to show up. People have to volunteer to help. And we are often the drivers of whether or not that actually happens. So we're observing people's behaviors and responses in association with that difficult task. And sometimes it taps on our ego. We're providing care and service for people the best way we know how, with the tools that we feel like God has given us to truly serve. And sometimes that plays out in really positive and life-giving ways. And sometimes it plays out in a way like, I don't ever want to speak to you again, and I just want to come from the pastor place, because I believe part of my calling is to humanize pastors, is to take us off the pedestal and let people know that we bleed and we trip up and we stutter over our words, just to give us access to the human experience, the community of people on planet Earth. We are not aliens who are just super powered individuals who do everything right. And so sometimes when people decide to break fellowship or move on, it hurts us and it hurts our feelings. But pastors, I want to say to you, it is, in my opinion, a spiritual gift, a superpower even, to be self-aware. Be aware of your ego. Be aware of how you may take things personally when it may not necessarily be personal. Start facilitating dialogue and conversations with people that allow them to be honest with you about how they feel. Even if they disagree with something that you have done or something that you have said, give voice to that. Allow that to help shape the way you approach pastoring going forward. And in this situation, prepare yourself for when people will leave your church, because people will leave. I think we operate with this unspoken expectation that the people that we draw close to or we build some connection with are always going to be around. And we measure that relationship based on this kind of loyalty, this kind of expectation that they could never think differently, that they could never find home somewhere else, that they could never move on in the progression and understanding of personal opportunities and needs. And we need to be aware of our fragility in association with that. Give people space to be honest about their season of life and maybe a season that they're headed into beyond this moment here. People change. And here's just a scientific observation for you. Right now, this generation of church is more transient than ever. This is not the time where people lock into a church for 40 years of their life, 30 years of their life, 20 years of their life, 10 years of their life. Folks might be around for 2 to 5 years tops, particularly younger folks. The nature of society has changed in terms of what it means to work a full-time job. If you got tenure at a job, tenure is measured differently than it was 20, 30 years ago, where you had a badge of honor if you say, I've been here for 30 years. Now somebody will look at you like you're crazy if you stayed at one job for 30 years getting paid the same amount of money. It's the same thing with churches. You've been at one church for 30 years. This is for pastors. We have to start thinking about people that come into our spaces in this way and acknowledge that we may only have opportunity to build relationship with them for a short amount of time. It's not guaranteed that they're going to be with us till the wheels fall off. So if we begin to do that introspective work about things that we're sensitive to, our egos, our expectations, hopefully we can build trust and honesty in the ways that we interact with these people we are supposed to be serving. We need to prepare ourselves for discussions with seasonal members to be able to acknowledge, like, I think you're going to be here for a season, but I'm not really sure if it's going to be longer than that. I want to help you find where the best place is for you in the next season. Because you don't want to be checked out of that part of life where it is a decision time. It's a decision-making time about how your life is going to change. How would you feel if somebody made those changes without consulting you? I know I'm talking to some pastors in the room because we have all experienced some degree of that where people decided not to talk to us about their life decision before they made it. And it may be because we didn't create an environment of safety to have those conversations and be involved in what that change looks like for them. So I'll just say for me, practically, sometimes I do some crazy things. And one of the things that we've instituted at my local church, and let me just say, I enjoy the benefit of having a small church. The larger your church is, the harder this is going to be it's going to be for you to pull it off. You're not going to be able to pull it off as easily. But we take the third Sundays off every month. We do not have service on the third Sunday of every month. And with that Sunday, I literally encourage members of my church to visit other churches, to get tapped in with something that God is doing somewhere else, to get a broader understanding of what church is, because it's not just locked into my voice and my perspective. You got to see the world. You got to be well traveled. I think pastors need to take initiative like that to prevent this awkward tension that ultimately results when people leave. So that's first for pastors. For parishioners, the people, the folks who are attending churches over the course of different seasons of life, I think that a reasonable expectation is to at least define a reason for joining a church on the front end. It's often kind of assumed that you go to a place to have a really powerful or inspirational service in that moment, and it's like, wow, I'm sold. I got to be here. If this is the way it is, this is where I have to be for the rest of my days. You may be overshooting that in your mind, but it feels right in that moment. That's not a healthy reason to join a church. Because if you're depending on the duplication of a certain experience, we have to remind ourselves that people are human. Now, if you got a budget and a production value associated with what you present, just know it costs money to continue that level of production and polish to make sure people keep coming. And some churches are built for that, some are not. The people responding to that end up becoming consumers. And I want to caution you away from consumerism as a reason to join or be a part of a church. You should be thinking, and if you are married or if you've got a group of friends that you're joining or thinking about joining with, you guys should be having some conversations as to why. What relationship do you have with the concept of church? How do you define church? I believe in general, it's good to acknowledge for yourself as an attendee or a parishioner that a good, healthy experience could be joining several churches over the course of time. To say, yeah, I'll probably end up at about 3 or 4 churches throughout the course of my life just to kind of tap in and see where God is speaking to me in this season of my life. It's healthy to acknowledge that on the front end, not to look at a church as the solution for every season of your life, because you going to change and they going to change. So think about that on the front end as you are attending. Have some self-determination. Don't just subject yourself to manipulation, some sales pitch that somehow won you for the moment, but then they got to keep selling to you. No, have some self-determination, some agency to say, I chose this. Nobody sold me a hill of beans. I did this, and this is why I will continue. Determine a timeline. I think it's good for you to say, I'm going to give this church a couple of years to truly investigate what this is all about, to truly try to build some relationships. And after that, I'll decide whether I want to stay, continue to serve here, or if it's time for me to think about something different. Finally, like a hard line piece of advice that I would give is to find a church with a mission, a church that's doing something in the community to serve, to help, something functional that you can attach yourself to and say, this is a good reason for me to be here, to help with this mission or to be aligned with this purpose, because it's something I'm passionate about, something I believe in, and ultimately something I can contribute to. If you're going to a church that ain't got no mission, then you're going to lose reasons after a while, after they stop entertaining you, after they stop looking like the kind of people that you look up to, after they say something crazy politically, it's going to be a wrap for you. You cannot look at those changing factors as your reason. It's got to be something that is universal and starts with the scripture and comes to life right where you are. When it's time to move on, you are then equipped to approach the decision in a way that is self-informed and not necessarily passive aggressive. It's like, I'm gonna have this conversation. I am going to make this decision, and I'm going to incorporate my church community and pastors in the fact that I'm moving on, because I let them know out the gate, here's the reasons I'm here, or at least I made self-determinations as to why I'm here. If some of these factors change, it ain't about beef, it's about change. Beef is not something that has to be connected to change all the time. It doesn't have to be drama. It doesn't have to be a big falling out and I never want to speak to you again. We have arguments as family, but we have to be careful with how we use the term family. If the place where you are is in a family environment, then treat it like family. Try your best to dignify the relationship and have that conversation as you're preparing to move on. In the conversation about moving on, I just want to encourage you to show appreciation for what this place did for you, what the pastor has done for you. If they contributed anything good, if that was the primary reason you were there and saying, man, I just love this pastor. He or she has been just such a blessing in my life. Let that pastor know before you dip. Let that pastor know before you move on. Even if you don't like something they just said, just say, I won't forget that time you were there for me when I needed you. And close the door. That's the closure. I said what I needed to say, and now I'm moving on with a clear, clean conscience. That's what I want us all to have, is a clear, clean conscience. We're going to have to make hard choices, but it's so much better to do it with a clear conscience. It's so much better to say, listen, I did all that I could. I showed up with integrity. I gave what I could to maintain peace. And now it's time for me to move on. I want to encourage those of you who are looking at churches, part of churches, to have those kinds of conversations, because when you do, you leave room for return. Not return to membership. Chill out, pastors, because sometimes when you see somebody who's been away for a while, it's like, oh, they back. Not necessarily. Sometimes people just want to come back home for a good home cooked meal, a familiar environment, to say what's up to somebody they haven't seen for a while. Leave room for that instead of trying to lock them back into your agenda. And for those who are going to try that out, just go with a pure motive. Say, listen, I miss seeing this person. I miss seeing this pastor. I just want to show him some love, bring an offering, bring a gift, bring a smile. I don't care. Just say, this is always home for me. And I want to make sure I tap back in home because it was instrumental in the person or the people we're becoming. Finally, my disclaimer. This is not for manipulative, abusive pastors, church environments. None of what I said applies to y'all. As a matter of fact, I hope y'all fail. If you are a manipulative, abusive pastor and you facilitate abusive, harmful, destructive environments, I want everything you have to crumble. And I'm just letting you know out the gate. You are harming people. You are creating trauma and traumatic circumstances for people to interact with faith, their personal faith walk with God himself, because you just want to control them and you want to create consumeristic demands for loving God. I want you to fail. And I am not trying to help you keep your people. I want your people to find freedom from you because you are their oppressor. You are their abuser. And I don't want to make any caveats for people enduring abuse, manipulation, and control, things that don't have anything to do with who God is and ultimately his character. So you are actually causing harm, and I have no kind of help for you at all, no space for you. And actually, I'm often pastoring the people who left your church. So they come to me and have these conversations about what you have done and how you will not own it. You just keep facilitating the same behaviors over and over again. So that's my disclaimer for the abusive, manipulative, consumeristic churches. There's no help for you. You have to face God with who you are and clear your conscience by repenting, saying, I understand the harm that I've caused, and I'm going to participate in trying to make it right on some level. If you're the pastor of these kind of churches, everything that I said can't apply to you because you don't have any trust. And you keep people around out of fear and ignorance. You should be afraid because God's going to come to judge that. So you should be analyzing your motives before God. Clear your conscience with him and then do your best to make it right with the people. And for the people who are part of those ministries, run. If you don't know what it is to be a part of it, ask questions, ask people. If you're in my city and if you're proximate to the location of our church building, I'll talk to you about it. Tell me some of the factors. And I've got relationships with pastors to weigh the differences between true abuse and somebody who's just complaining about a piece of advice that actually is wisdom. There's ways to weigh those things. But I don't ever want to be somebody who co-signs manipulation and abuse. That's all I got for today. I had time. I had some time. And we dealt with what we could. Again, I want to encourage you guys to like the YouTube page, click follow the journey, tap in with the website, www.taylorgray.com. There's a whole bunch of stuff on there right now. There's things that I'm continuing to add and update the website with. So please tap in with me on there. And of course, if you want to support me, then you could either support via Cash App or PayPal. I'm so glad that you're joining me for this episode, and we are just getting started. I know I got my overalls on, but we'll do the fashion episode eventually. Peace and blessings, and thank you once again.